Friday, 9 a.m., probate court. Judge, temporary suspension, full audit. I brought one thing to win this, a blue recipe box. 2 years ago, in the ICU, Tom squeezed my hand. Evie, promise me, don't open the blue recipe box. If anything happens, give it to Pastor Reed. He kept that promise until a bank letter arrived. Safe deposit box 317, fees due. Tom never kept secrets like that. I climbed a chair, took down the 10, recipes on top, a brass key under the lining, and Tom's note. Don't talk to Brent. Don't talk to Pastor Reed. Call Asha Patel. Box 317 protects you and someone else. Last night, they knocked on my door, Brent and Pastor. Just hand us the box. I spoke through the latch. Send your requests to Attorney Patel. This morning, we opened box 317 at the bank. A notebook, transfers, church benevolence money, a name I didn't know, Della Langley, and a pattern that spells one word, exploitation. Now the judge wants every receipt. If these numbers are true, we don't just save Della, we expose a guardianship scam wearing a halo. And that code Tom roughed me, 6, 12, 18 jars, boil 317. Not just jam, directions to the truth. Stay with me. I'll show you how a recipe box beat a courtroom. In the ICU, with the monitor clicking a stubborn metronome and a nurse adjusting a line she pretended not to notice was failing, he squeezed my fingers once and whispered, "Evie, promise me, don't open the blue recipe box. If anything happens to me, give it to Pastor Reed." He paused, gathered the last of his strength, and added, "Please." I promised, because that is what you do when the person you love is slipping out of reach and the only thing you can hand them is your word. The blue tin sat on top of our fridge, next to the jar of spare buttons. Its daisy decal chipped where Tom had bumped it with a ladder the night our daughter Lena lost her first tooth. It was part of the kitchen landscape, like the magnets that held up oil change reminders and the note I'd written to myself months ago to defrost the freezer on a Saturday that never arrived. For almost 2 years, I kept that promise as if it were a lid pressed down over boiling water. The church ladies cycled through casseroles and Pyrex dishes with masking tape labels. Lena flew in from Chicago for the funeral in a black dress she said was interview appropriate. And then 3 months later for Easter in a suit her boss called client-facing. I went back to the middle school library where the books still smelled of dust and new glue, and where a 7th grader told me my hair made me look like the nice kind of witch. Grief became a routine. Laundry, lists, learning how to carry garbage cans to the curb in the dark without dragging them into the ditch like I had the first week he was gone. People who loved me called. People who liked him told me stories about his laugh. The house shifted around the absence until I could breathe again without counting.
What cracked the promise wasn't curiosity. It was a dull white envelope from Citizens Bank addressed to the estate of Thomas Hart, care of Mrs. Evelyn Hart, with cheerful clip art of a vault door. Inside was a late notice for safe deposit box 317. I read it twice because Tom had never mentioned a safe deposit box, and he had been the sort who updated the oil, changed air filters on the first of the month, and put warranties in a plastic sleeve behind the cereal boxes. Authorized signer, Thomas Hart. Fees due, $35. I poured tea, climbed onto a chair, and reached for the blue tin. It felt heavier than it should have, as if secrets weighed something. I carried it to the table like it might bite. I sat. I told myself I was following orders. The letter was a detail, and Tom had always said, "Evie, check the details. That's where truth naps until you shake the couch." The hinge gave with a tired click. Inside were index cards in my own handwriting. Grandma May's peach pie, chicken and dumplings, Golightly's chili. The corners were softened by years of butter and impatience. When I flipped the top card over, the back carried a clean photocopy of a cashier's check, a date, a memo line, Hickory Grove Assisted Living. The address was Rutherford County, not ours. Under the felt lining, glued to the bottom of the tin, was a small brass key. A note lay on top in Tom's blocky handwriting. Only if you must. I unfolded it with hands that were steady out of habit. Evie, if you're here, I'm gone. I asked you not to open this because it drags you into a fight you didn't ask for. The key is for box 317 at Citizens Bank. Inside are records that protect you and someone else. Don't talk to Brent. Don't talk to Pastor Reed, no matter how kind he sounds. Call Miss Aisha Patel at the Elder Law Clinic first. She knows everything. I love you. I'm sorry. Tom. I stared long enough for the tea to go cold. Brent was Tom's cousin, the one who materialized reliably for family photos and barbecues where he held a beer like a prop and never once helped bring in chairs. He called himself a professional guardian, which sounded noble until you heard him describe it. He'd say, folks get old and they need somebody who knows how to run things. The doorbell rang. I startled so hard I knocked a spoon off the table. On my porch stood no one, just a folded note tucked halfway under the doormat on church letterhead. Evie, dear, Tom left some things at my office for me to hold for you. I'd like to stop by tonight to pick up the blue recipe box to get those moving. I'll keep it safe until you're ready. Pastor Reed. My porch light hummed in the late June dusk. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the soft hiss of sprinklers and the single bicycle bell from the kid 3 doors down. I slid the chain on the door, took a picture of the note, and texted it to the number at the bottom of Tom's letter. It was nearly 8. I expected a voicemail message about business hours. The phone rang twice, and a calm voice said, Elder Law Clinic, this is Asha. I said, Asha Patel? She said, this is she. I said, my husband was Tom Hart. She was quiet for a breath, and in that space, I felt something like relief. Okay, she said, exactly like a librarian when you put a puzzle on her desk, and she loves puzzles. Do you have the key to 317? I said, yes. Has anyone asked you for the blue recipe box? I said, yes. Do not open your door to anyone tonight. Don't mention the box again to anyone but me. I can meet you at Citizens Bank at 9 in the morning. I'll bring a letter of representation. If anyone shows up at your house before then, you call the sheriff. If you're nervous, I can send someone now. I'm fine, because I was not fine, but I had learned how to say those words politely. He asked me to call you. She said, I know. He told me you might, and he told me you don't like waking people up. Consider me awake, Mrs. Hart. Lock your door. I'll see you at 9. I slept with the blue tin on the chair beside my bed like a ridiculous pet. Ruthie from the Maple Street Diner called around 8:30 to tell me the breakfast special was biscuits and gravy, and I should come in because grief drinks coffee better than it cries. I told her I had a bank appointment. She offered to save me a slice of coconut cake anyway, because it tasted like forgiveness. Citizens Bank's vault smelled like paper and cold metal. A woman in a navy vest checked my ID and held up the little brass key like a question mark. The lock turned with a satisfying inner click. When the long, flat steel box slid forward, it made a low sound like a drawer surprised to be opened. Inside was a spiral notebook, a manila folder labeled in Tom's block letters, Della Langley, and a thumb drive rubber banded to the spine. I didn't know any Della. Miss Patel and I sat at a small table in the vault room. She wore no-nonsense glasses and a cardigan that said she kept spare pens and the patience to use them. I slid the folder toward her. I felt like I was putting a live wire on the table. The notebook was tidy, Tom's voice on paper. Dates, check numbers, amounts, bank branch notes, names, memos. The folder contained invoices from Hickory Grove Assisted Living in Rutherford County, copies of cashier's checks, a grainy photo of a small, dark-haired woman holding a baby beneath a Tennessee sky. The baby was more idea than face, wrapped in a blanket with a little embroidered cloud. Tom stood beside them, maybe 25, his hair thicker, his shoulders narrow and kind. He had that expression he sometimes wore when he got something exactly right with his hands and wanted no one to make a fuss. "Let's look at the drive later," Miss Patel said, turning the notebook gently. "For now, you should know this isn't the first guardianship case I've seen where a relative files when someone has assets and no loud family. Do you know Brent's business? I know the way he introduces himself. I don't know what it looks like in receipts. It looks like this." She tapped a page where Tom had transcribed transfers from an account called Reed Community Care. A church benevolence fund can be a beautiful thing. It can also be a bucket with holes if the wrong hands hold it. I'll file a motion today for an emergency accounting of Mr. Avery's guardianship over Miss Langley. And Mrs. Hart, if anyone comes to your house asking for that blue tin again, call me. Call the sheriff. Don't open your door. I won't. And I meant it. I had opened one too many doors in my life because I was raised polite. At home, I set the blue tin back on the fridge and stepped off the chair into a different life. The house looked the same. Lemon oil on the table, a light we never replaced in the hall flickering between jobs, but the air felt like a courtroom. By 4 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. Not a ring, a knock you feel in your chest. When I looked through the peephole, Brent stood on my porch in a pale sport coat, his sunglasses in his hair, his expression a smile practiced in therapy. Pastor Reed stood half a step behind him in a short-sleeved dress shirt and a tie that announced funeral or board meeting. "Evie," Brent called, using the voice people use with dogs they'd like to coax closer, "we need to talk about some of Tom's affairs." I spoke through the door. "Miss Patel says you should send anything you need to her." Pastor Reed folded his hands as if prayer worked like Wi-Fi. "Tom left some things with me for your comfort, dear. It would grieve him to see you confused." "Would it grieve him like it grieved him to see Della moved into a cheaper room while somebody charged triple the county average?" I asked, surprised by my own steadiness. There was a beat of silence. Brent's smile thinned. "You don't know what you're saying. I do, and I know how to call the sheriff." They left. The sound of their footsteps on my porch boards echoed longer than it should have. When the taillights vanished, I sat on the floor and trembled for a full minute because bravery looks solid from the outside and like jelly from the inside. Then I stood up and made a peach pie because anger and sugar share a pantry. The next morning, I drove to Hickory Grove Assisted Living with a bag of store-bought sugar cookies because I didn't know Della's likes. Assisted living smells like lemon cleaner and longing and the soft whisper of daytime television. A tall nurse with a badge that said Sandra led me down a hall where someone was practicing the piano, slowly and bravely. We passed a bulletin board with a calendar, bingo, chair yoga, hymn sing, line dancing, and a photo of a woman with a blue ribbon from the county fair. "Ms. Langley's in the sunroom," Sandra said. "She likes the light." A small woman swayed in a rocker, humming, her sweater lavender and her hair pulled back in a ponytail growing out of a short cut. Her eyes were wary bright, of someone whose memory slipped like fish through fingers. On a side table sat a small vase of grocery store daisies. "Della?" I said softly. She looked at me, then past me. "Peaches, June peaches. Put the jars in the back, not in front where the preacher man looks." She blinked like a camera adjusting. "You are my sunshine," she sang, and the melody lifted like a kite. "Tommy with the kind shoulders," she added, smiling at something over my shoulder that I wished I could see. "I'm Evie," I said, "Tom's wife." Her smile softened. "Good boy. Daisies even when they were on sale and the stems were all the wrong length." Her hands moved as if arranging stems in air. "I'm going to make sure you're okay," I said. "I promise." At home, I pulled the recipe card for Grandma Mae's peach freezer jam. On the back, in Tom's pencil, were numbers that looked like nonsense years ago when he'd scribbled them while I packed the freezer. 612, 18 jars, boil 317. I stared. 612, June 12th, 18 jars, 317,
Box 317. The jam was a breadcrumb trail. Miss Patel filed her motion that afternoon. The probate clerk set an emergency hearing for Friday morning at the Williamson County Courthouse. The courthouse looks like it always has, a mild building with a clock that is sometimes right, and a lobby where bailiffs know which lawyers need a coffee and which ones need a miracle. There are scuffed benches and posters about elder abuse, and a vending machine that loves to eat dollar bills. The night before the hearing, Lena arrived from Chicago with her hair up and her carry-on full of conviction. She dumped her tote on the entry bench exactly the way she had at 16. "Mom," she said, "you should have told me." "There wasn't anything to tell until there was," I said, which was true and insufficient. I made tea. She took off her shoes and lined them side by side like soldiers. We sat at the table and I showed her the video on the thumb drive because it was the only way he could speak for himself. Tom's face filled the laptop screen, framed by our garage wall with the bicycles hanging behind him like a mobile. He looked alive in the way that hurts. "Evie," he said, and I felt the elasticity of time. "You're mad I kept secrets. You should be. Before I met you, I dated a woman named Della. We weren't right for each other. She had a baby. Her people asked me to stay out of it. I did, for years. Then Della started slipping. Brent found out, filed for guardianship, and moved her to a cheaper place while he managed her assets. I started paying quietly for a better home. I should have told you. I didn't want to open old doors or hurt you. If I'm gone, Brent and Pastor Reed will come for you. Brent because he wants control, Reed because he sits on the board that launders the benevolence money Brent funnels. There's more on the drive, emails, accounts. Asha will know what to do. I love you. Finish what I started." Lena's chin trembled. "He had a baby?" I said. "He helped a woman because that was what I could say without breaking open. He may have a daughter. He should have told me the day we said I do." "Can you forgive him?" I said. "I'm still married to his best parts, and I'm mad at his worst. Maybe that's what love looks like after the vows are done and groceries have been bought for 30 years. Probate court felt like a school assembly. People whisper and the chairs squeak, and the person at the front decides whose turn it is to be listened to. Judge Henson peered over us over readers on a chain. Brent sat with a lawyer whose tie was too shiny. Pastor Reed sat 3 rows back with church folks who looked like they hadn't read the whole story but had strong opinions about the title. Miss Patel stood. She has the demeanor of a glass of water on a very hot day, clear, necessary. "Your Honor," she said, "we request a full accounting from Mr. Avery for his guardianship of Ms. Langley and a temporary suspension pending that accounting. We submit evidence of self-dealing, a below-market sale of Ms. Langley's home to a limited liability company managed by Mr. Avery's associate, donations routed through a church fund he influences, and fees charged at 3 times the county average." Brent's lawyer smiled with his mouth. "Your Honor, conspiracy theories and casseroles. Mrs. Hart is grieving and has been misled." Miss Patel slid Tom's notebook forward as if she were setting down a chess piece. "Receipts rarely mislead," she said. "We also have an affidavit from the administrator of Hickory Grove that Miss Langley was moved from a private room to a shared room last winter while expenditures increased." Judge Henson looked at Pastor Reed. "Pastor, are you on the board of Reed Community Care, as referenced here?" Reed folded his hands, as if to show them empty. "Just trying to serve the least of these, Judge." The judge said, which in Southern means, "I hear your words and do not buy your meaning." He took off his glasses and cleaned them with the edge of his robe. "Mr. Avery, I see transfers from Miss Langley's account to Reed Community Care within days of property transactions. I also see care management fees that would make a hedge funder blush. I am granting the temporary suspension and appointing an independent guardian ad litem while we audit your accounts. We'll reconvene in 30 days. Anything else today?" Miss Patel shook her head. Brent's jaw worked like he was chewing gravel. Outside in the heat, he leaned in close and lowered his voice. "You don't know what you've started. Daylight. That's what I started."
Relief arrived like a folding chair at the Maple Street Diner and a slice of coconut cake on the house. Ruthie slid into the seat across from me with 2 forks. "You did it," she said. "Temporarily. Start with coffee, finish with justice, middle with snacks. That's how we run the diner. It'll do for a case." At home that night, I slept for the first time without dreaming Tom was in the garage asking me to hand him a wrench I couldn't find. In the morning, I called Hickory Grove and asked Sandra what Della liked for breakfast. Banana bread. Warm. 2 weeks later, Miss Patel called to say the audit had produced more. "Evie," she said, "the county's independent audit turned up sealed adoption records from the 90s that appear to match Della's child. The woman is 34. Her name is Sadie. She lives in Murfreesboro. She has consented to contact." I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the sprinkler tick across the small square of our lawn, sparkling like someone had shaken glitter into the morning. "Does she know about Tom?" "She knows he helped her mother," Miss Patel said. "She'd like to meet you, cautiously." She said that word twice. "Cautious as the only speed I have left," I said. We met in a park under a crepe myrtle. Sadie carried herself like a woman who had learned to carry her own weight, shoulders squared, eyes steady, keys in her hand like a plan. We sat on a bench and traded true things. She worked at a pediatric clinic. She liked iced coffee even in December. She had a scar on her chin from falling off a bike when she was 9. She had a mother and a stepfather who had loved her well and were confused by this chapter but supportive, in the way that matters, showing up. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I don't have anything to give but pie and stories. Pie's a solid start." I told her about Tom's laugh that started in his chest and made his eyes crinkle. I told her about his habit of buying grocery store daisies because he didn't trust florists to put greenery where words should go. She told me about a day when a man with kind shoulders and a shy smile brought her mother soup and stayed long enough to fix a shelf. She was 6. She remembered the way he said her name like it was important and not a mistake. We didn't label anything. We didn't have to decide anything on that bench except to meet again. Boundaries are not the end of a story. They are the beginning of safety. Meanwhile, someone tried to get inside my house. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had run to the grocery for butter, and when I came home, the back screen was hanging crooked, and the frame had a fresh dent. Nothing was missing, but a photo of Tom and I at the county fair lay face down on the hall table, which is not how the photo frame fell. I called the sheriff. A deputy walked through, took notes, scribbled a report number. "You got enemies?" he asked with small talk that wasn't small. "Apparently," I said. "Got a dog?" "Not one that barks," I said. He recommended a camera doorbell and motion lights. Lena ordered them from her phone before I could say I'd think about it. Brent texted me an hour later, a message that sounded concerned and read like a threat. "Heard you had some trouble, cuz. You should let people help you. The box makes you a target." I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Miss Patel, who replied, "Documented." The 30-day hearing was a performance turned inside out. The independent guardian ad litem reported that Miss Langley had received services at cost far above market rates, that her home had been transferred to an LLC with Brent's known associate as manager at a price 20% below assessed value, that Reed Community Care had received sums from Miss Langley's account on the same days church board minutes reflected benevolence disbursements. The DA's office sent a young assistant with a jaw set like a doorstop. They asked for time to pursue an investigation into financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Judge Henson accepted Brent's resignation from the guardianship with what I can only call relief, as if a stone he didn't know he was carrying had fallen out of his robe. Pastor Reed resigned from the church board to spend more time with family, which is what people write in bulletins when truth would scorch the paper. Some folks were angry. Some were silent. Some stopped by my table at the diner, laid a hand on my shoulder and said it's always the ones who talk soft when they're taking your money who talk loud when they're caught.
When I went to church that Sunday, the new intern pastor preached on light and secrets, and afterward, a woman I barely knew from the handbell choir handed me a pie and whispered, "Thank you for turning on the porch light." Della had good days and days like fog. On good days, she told me stories about a man named Tommy who made grocery store daisies look like morning. She talked about a little girl who lined up stuffed animals on the couch and made them watch the weather. On fog days, she hummed "You Are My Sunshine," and I sat close, and that was enough. Sadie came to Hickory Grove with me a month after our bench talk. She wore a blue dress and held the strap of her purse like a rope across a river. "Hi, Mama," she said, and then stopped because the word came out and rearranged her bones. Della looked up and smiled in that wandering way, then focused like a camera finds the face. "Sunshine," she said, and lifted both hands. They cried, they laughed. I sat beside them and cried toward my lap so I didn't interrupt whatever God was doing through synapses and old songs. We didn't tell people what to call themselves. We let the words they could hold find them. There were moments when I was mad at Tom so hard my teeth ached. There were moments when I stood in the garage and touched the workbench and felt the soft punch of his absence so vividly that I had to sit on the step and breathe into my hands. I talked to Miss Patel about forgiveness with an accountant's precision. I asked, "Am I required to forgive him all at once, like a bill paid in full?" She said, "You are required by exactly no one to do anything on anyone else's timeline. You can forgive in parts. You can forgive the boy who loved a woman he couldn't keep, and the man who bought daisies, and the husband who asked you for a promise he had no right to ask. You can love in full and still call harm what it was." I started a class at the library on Wednesday nights called the Recipe Box Project because the best way I knew to do right by what had been wrong was to make sure other people could open their own boxes and not be afraid of what was inside. We covered guardianships and powers of attorney and how to read hospital bills and what to ask a bank when the person at the counter tells you, "That's not my department." We ate cookies. People brought their tins, holiday boxes, coffee cans, Tupperware with histories, and told the stories of what was in them. There is always a tin. It is sometimes literal, and sometimes the shape of a drawer we don't open because we can't bear what will be inside. Some nights after class, women stayed late and asked if it was okay to be mad and brave at the same time. I said yes. We are the ones who set down ugly promises made without the whole story. We are the ones who hand back responsibility handed to us in someone else's handwriting. We are the ones who step onto moving sidewalks with knees knocking and keep walking anyway. The DA's office eventually filed charges against Brent for financial exploitation. The church's insurance company nudged the board to do an internal audit that came back with words like irregularity and oversight, and recommendations that read like apologies and numbers. I did not gloat. Okay, I breathed once in my kitchen when a text from Ruthie arrived that said, "Girl, he is suspended from the Chamber of Commerce. They don't let the Santa Parade Committee crooks play with the candy canes." Then I breathed out and went to Hickory Grove with banana bread. On a lightning bug evening in August, Lena and I hosted a potluck on her back deck. Ruthie brought deviled eggs that could win a county fair without bribing the judge. Miss Patel arrived late with iced tea and a smile undercut by a lawyer's habit of scanning the room. Sadie came with a peach pie that was both pretty and honest. We ate it and laughed and didn't talk about court. We talked about school supplies and who had a good plumber and why the fireworks tent outside town parked on the patch of grass that never grew back right after the old Piggly Wiggly closed. After the last dish went into the dishwasher, I took the blue recipe box out to the porch. I had lined it with plastic and filled it with soil. Time spilled over the edge like a neat rebellion. I pressed my palm against the daisy decal and spoke into the warm Tennessee dark. "Tom," I said, and the crickets kept their time, "you should have told me. I forgive you in parts and love you in full. Your secrets didn't protect me. The truth did." On the first day of school, A seventh grade girl came into the library and asked if I had any books about peaches because her granddad had a tree and she wanted to make jam. I checked the catalog and handed her a community cookbook and a handout I'd made about freezer jam, the one with my notes about 612 and boil 317. When she left, she turned back and said, "My mom says you helped her aunt with some legal thing. She says you're fierce." "I am someone's librarian," I said, and that felt like the same thing. Sometimes I think bravery looks like a woman in court with a notebook. Sometimes it looks like a banana bread on a paper plate in a room that smells like lemon cleaner and perseverance. Sometimes it looks like knocking on your own heart and saying, "Open up, there's a life in here." In October, I got a letter from the new board at our church, the one with names I trusted and eyes that didn't slide away when questions got hard. They were forming a community class on financial literacy for seniors and caregivers. Would I teach a section called Reading Receipts? I said yes, because sometimes revenge looks like a syllabus. One afternoon, Sadie and I sat on my porch with mason jars of sweet tea and a pad where we wrote every question we didn't have to answer that day. "Do you want to know if Tom was your father?" I asked, finally, because sometimes the only way through a question is to ask it plain. She watched a squirrel attempt something ambitious on the fence. She wanted to know if the man who showed up with daisies and soup and a shelf thought of me when he bought a blue box to keep a secret that wasn't even his. And she wanted to know if that kind of thinking counts. It counts. In the ledger where it matters, it counts. We did a DNA test months later because curiosity wears sensible shoes and doesn't hurry. The results came back with percentages and a little colored map that declared what families have known forever, that blood and love are both maps, and sometimes they overlap like a Venn diagram, and sometimes they run parallel, like two roads that wave to each other across a field. We looked at the numbers in my kitchen, and then we put the paper in a drawer and made grilled cheese sandwiches with extra butter because heavy news deserves comfort food. In December, Pastor Reed moved away to take a calling out of state. People sent him off with pie and polite nods that hit 100 conversations. Brent took a plea. The judge said words about restitution and probation and community service that sounded like a list of things he should have been doing all along. The church started a new benevolence fund with triple signatures and quarterly audits, and a line item called "We Will Not Do That Again." The line item made me laugh when I saw it on the bulletin board. I took a picture and sent it to Miss Patel, who sent back a heart. On New Year's Day, I walked through my quiet house and touched the things that mattered. The dent in the hallway where Lena had ridden a scooter indoors against the rules. The scratch on the table where Tom had tried to pry up a label with a butter knife and left a mark instead. The blue recipe box now alive with time, because things that held secrets deserve something green. I thought about Della humming in the sunroom, about Sadie's steady eyes, about Brent's easy smile turned brittle, about a judge and readers tapping a page with his pen. I thought about all the women who had stayed late after class and asked me if it was okay to be angry and still be the kind of person who made casseroles for grieving neighbors. I told them what I tell myself. Anger is a tool, not a home. You use it to pry open stuck windows, to smash locks on doors that were never meant to be closed, and then you put it down and make room for air. The next summer, we held a reunion in the park for families touched by guardianship cases. Miss Patel brought a tent and handouts and a whiteboard where she wrote words like petition and accounting in big letters that didn't scare anyone. People brought lawn chairs and stories. A man in a Titan's cap told us how his mother had signed papers she didn't understand and how a county clerk had noticed and called it lawyers she trusted. An older woman in a red cardigan said "me too" so many times that the phrase became a chorus. We ate barbecue and watermelon and pretend the ants weren't there until they were, and then we moved our plates and kept talking because that is how community works.
Later that night on my back porch, Lena lit a citronella candle and told me that she had been offered a job back in Tennessee. I'm not saying yes because of everything, but I'm not saying yes because I like being near your banana bread. We laughed. We cried a little. We counted fireflies like blessings and let the counting be silly and holy at once.
Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had handed the blue recipe box to Pastor Reed like a good widow and gone back to the library with my head down. I would have slept more that first summer. I would have missed Sadie on the bench under the crepe myrtle. I would have missed Della's humming, turning into a word that made a daughter stand still like a dock catching a boat. I would have missed the room full of women holding their tins like lanterns. I would have missed the part of myself that can walk into a courthouse with a notebook and a spine. Tom should have told me the truth the day he carried my boxes into this house and put them on the kitchen counter like he was offering me a future. He should have told me the day we signed the mortgage, the day we bought Lena's first bicycle, the day he asked me to promise something he knew I would turn into a vow. He didn't. He asked me to hold a secret that didn't protect me. It did not break me to lay it down. It built me. On the anniversary of his death, I went to the Maple Street Diner alone with the book I didn't read and ordered coconut cake because some rituals save you. Ruthie slid into the seat opposite me and set down an index card. "New special," she said. On the card, she had written in her careful diner print, "Grandma Mae's Peach Freezer Jam." On the back, she had penciled 612, 18 jars, boiled 317, and a heart. "Thank you," I said, and pressing the card between my fingers felt like pressing a pulse. I tucked it into my purse beside my library card, and a photo of a small woman in a lavender cardigan and a young woman in a blue dress, their heads tipped toward each other like a secret they planned to keep forever. I walked home under a Tennessee sky that had made its peace with summer, cicadas singing like they'd been given a script, air thick enough to count. On my porch, the Time overflowed the blue box as if it had been waiting all its life to be asked to do something other than hold paper. I sat on the steps and listened to the neighborhood go to bed. Garage doors closing, sprinklers hissing, someone laughing down the street at a joke that didn't care who told it. I said goodnight to the dark like it could hear me. Then I went inside and set an extra chair at the table because you never know who you'll be feeding next. And I have come to believe that the best kind of legacy is not property or a perfect record, but a table with a room and a story that says, here's the truth, you can sit with it, it will not ruin you, it might even set you free. When the new school year started, my Wednesday night class filled up faster than we expected. We added chairs, then we added tables, then we added a second session. People brought their father's papers and their mother's medicine lists and the kind of questions you whisper because you think you should already know the answers. We learned together. We laughed, which is not what I expected to do while talking about power of attorney, but humor is how courage sneaks in. One evening, a man showed up late and stood in the doorway for a minute before he sat down. He kept his cap in his hands. After class, he came up and said, "Mrs. Hart, I was wrong about you." And I knew from the set of his shoulders that he had said out loud to someone that I was making trouble. He glanced down and then up again. "I'm glad you're not tired yet." I am tired. And that was not a confession so much as a measurement. I'm also stubborn. He laughed. "We'll put that on the flyer." We did. The next session's handbill read, "The Recipe Box Project, a class for stubborn people who want to know what they're signing." Ruthie tacked one to the diner board with a thumbtack that had a little plastic flower. Miss Patel hung one on her office corkboard with neutral pushpins because lawyers don't use the fancy ones. Sadie put it on her clinic's bulletin board and sent me a picture of a nurse pointing at it with a grin. On a crisp day in late October, I drove to Hickory Grove with a pumpkin muffin and a printout of a photo from the 90s. Della had a good day. We sat in the sun that slanted through the glass like something tender. She touched the photo with 2 fingers and said, "We were kids." And then she laughed like bells. She said, "He deserved to be happy. We all do."
I drove home the long way. The maples were showing off, and I let 'em. At a stoplight, I watched a man in a Titans hoodie teach a little boy how to look both ways before you cross. He held out an arm and stopped the child like a gate. The boy bounced on his toes. When the light changed, they crossed together, one hand loose and the other's tight. It struck me then that love is often a hand offered at the curb. It is sometimes a secret, which is the bruise under a sleeve. It is sometimes a ledger, which is the math that proves what your gut already knew. It is often a class on a Wednesday where a woman with a blue tin planter says, "We don't whisper this stuff anymore. We read it out loud."
On Thanksgiving, Lena and I set 2 extra places. We didn't know who would fill them, but I have learned to plan for grace like you plan for weather. Prepare for rain, be grateful for sun, like the porch either way. Sadie came with a pecan pie that would make you cry if you weren't already crying. Miss Patel dropped by after dinner with a container of something her mother had made, because mothers do that. Della could not travel, but the nurse sent a picture of her wearing a paper turkey hat and humming "Over the River and Through the Woods" in a key guilt-free. We went around the table and said things we were grateful for, because sometimes you force the ritual until it becomes a habit that outlasts the forcing. I said I was grateful for sturdy chairs. Lena said she was grateful for a job that brought her home. Sadie said she was grateful for daisies, even when they were on sale and the stems were all the wrong length. We laughed. We cried. We ate pie with our forks and then with our fingers, because rules are for kitchens, not for grace. When I was a girl, my mother told me that women in our family were keepers of recipes, of dates, of where the birth certificates lived in the hall closet behind the board games. I have kept a lot. Some things I should have put down sooner. Some things I held so tightly they bruised me. The blue recipe box taught me that what you keep should not be a secret whose job is to keep you quiet. What you keep should be a key you know how to use. On a Saturday in December, I stood at a folding table in the church fellowship hall, teaching a woman how to read the line on a hospital bill that calls itself facility fee and yet charges you for air you were already breathing. She was 60 and wore a sweatshirt with a snowman, and her hands shook a little until they didn't. At the end, she hugged me too long, and I let her. "You're fierce," she said, and I thought of the 7th grader in the library, and of Tom with his kind shoulders, and of a judge with readers, and of a woman in a lavender cardigan who could make a nickname outlast the disease. "I'm a librarian," I said. "We are our own kind of weather." That night, I put the blue recipe box in the middle of the kitchen table and planted a second herb. Rosemary for remembrance, my grandmother used to say. Thyme for strength. I ran my fingers over the daisy. I set out ingredients for peach freezer jam, even though peaches are wrong in December, and you have to make do with what the freezer held from June, because making do is a holy craft. I wrote 6/12 and 3/17 on a sticky note and pressed it to the fridge, not because I needed the reminder, but because sometimes you bless what saved you by writing it down again where anyone can see. When the timer beeped and the jars were in the back of the freezer, like a secret that's allowed to be known, I turned out the kitchen light. The house held its breath like houses do. I stood in the doorway and said good night to a man who asked for a promise he shouldn't have and given me the means to break it with honor. I said good night to a girl who had lined up stuffed animals to watch the weather. I said good night to a woman who had hummed when words were too heavy. I said good night to a city that had learned to read receipts together. I went to bed and slept with the cool confidence of someone who has opened the box, taken the key, and changed the story.